I'm going to be honest here. I wasn't sure how I wanted to approach this review. Starfield is such a massive game, and even after roughly 100 hours, I still can't help but feel I'm only scratching the surface of what the game has to offer, and I may feel compelled to do a follow-up review in the future when I've experienced more of what the game has to offer. So for this review, I'm not going to sit here and dive into mechanics I have no right talking about, even if I believe I have a good understanding of them, like the outpost building part of Starfield. Instead, I'm going to focus on the content I've experienced fully, which includes the entire main story, UC vs Crimson Fleet faction questline, various smaller side quests, exploring random planets, and going through an entire companion questline and romancing them. I also want to say there will be spoilers. I wish I could avoid them, but there are parts of the game I need to show to get certain points across, so you have been warned. Now, normally in these reviews, I usually like to start with the general gameplay mechanics to dive into what exactly the player can do in the game through the actions provided to them. But this time, I just want to jump straight into not only the story, but the design choices of Starfield around that story. This idea of traveling around to multiple planets across space gathering artifacts with mysterious powers in a Bethesda-style RPG is literally my dream game. Unfortunately, as much as I loved my time with Starfield, and the fact it's probably in my top 5 games I played this year, I couldn't help but feel let down by so many moments in the main story. Mainly around the artifacts. They're unbelievably important to the story and what your main objective in the game revolves around, but the actual missions designed around them were very boring or generic feeling most of the time. For example, when you meet Adrasia in the cave for the first time, meeting her is great because it's a new companion that you don't know nothing about. But the cave you travel through with her for the artifact is dreadful and full of generic enemies. Like, why not go for something cooler? Like having the cave entrance close in on you and have something like faint sounds of some alien creatures resonating from deep within that you know you're going to have to fight. Then you could have had some dialogue options along the way talking about what you both think the artifacts might be and if you think you're going to survive, which this would create an everlasting impression on the player that builds a small connection to the new companion. Just something to spice up gathering their artifacts a bit more and put more emphasis on the power they hold. And at times Bethesda does do a great job of displaying that power, like with the mission Entangled. During this mission, after arriving on the planet that the artifact is on, you come across a lab that seems to be locked down for some unknown reason. A few seconds later, and you're teleporting in and out of your reality to an alternate one. I loved everything about this mission. It provided a unique gameplay experience. It has choices that affect the final outcome of the mission, and it truly shows how it's so important to gather these artifacts, how they are so dangerous for humanity to possess. This is the creativity I wanted to see from Bethesda in the main story. Because you're in outer space, you can make up whatever you want, and yes, I know they wanted the worlds and creatures in them to feel as if they really could exist. I applaud them for that. They created some of the best skyboxes I've seen in a game, and it will never not be cool stepping onto a planet for the first time, just taking in the environments that look incredible thanks to the top-notch lighting of the game and how their position in the respective system affects the world around you. With that said though, I just wish they would have got a little more crazy with ideas around the artifacts, such as instead of walking into generic cave number 2, the artifact is in the middle of a desert plain and it caused the creatures around it to grow double in size. Just wacky stuff like that would have been so cool to me. You know, get really creative like they did with vaults and Fallout. Same applies to the temples where you get your starborn powers from. They are scattered throughout the game, and over time you will gain access to more of them, but they become very repetitive the further into the game you get. Like the first encounter with them, it's awesome because the temple designs are incredible. Floating around this alien-like device and unlocking the power within it is very cool, the first time around. But after doing it 20 plus times, it's like, here we go again. I almost wish from a design perspective they would have cut the artifacts down in numbers, made it so instead of building this device that lets you grab jump to the Unity with your ship, you would have had to take the artifacts to various temples around space and slotting the artifacts into the temples to activate them. But the way the temple was designed was based around the artifacts' properties, so the temple where you slot in the artifacts will reflect those. So one temple has an anti-gravity field around it, another temple blasts out solar flares you have to avoid to get to where the artifact has to be inserted, would have made getting the respective powers more interesting and connected everything together more uniquely. Then after activating all the temples, it could have unlocked one final one where the player gets a special device made for jumping to the Unity at the end of the story. And yes, I know, and agree, I'm asking for a lot considering the scale of the game. But that's where I wish Bethesda would have went with less is more approach to the game. I wish the game would have just took place in our solar system. Our solar system as a seamless map. Earth could still be a wasteland, New Atlantis could have been a floating city in space, Aquila could have been on Mars alongside Sidonia, and so much more detail could have been drove into the planets, more cities and truly unique places to explore, because what makes Starfield truly unique like other Bethesda titles? Fallout has vats and vaults, Skyrim had the Dragonborn powers which Starfield kinda copies. What does Starfield bring to separate itself from those games? Spaceships, but if you really break it down, these are largely ignored in the main story. Outside of a few moments like the opening tutorial or battling the starboard, you basically don't have to engage in almost none of the flying mechanics, which is a shame because when I first started playing Starfield, I thought the flying was pretty bad, just straight up. But the more time I put into it, the better ships I got, the more I engaged in the flying systems, I ended up really enjoying them, but it's a shame it's so largely ignored in the main story quests. Well, except for one game mechanic related to flying, while in principle is really cool and makes sense, but it's also kind of pointless, and that's grav jumping. So when traveling from one system to the next, based on your ship's capabilities, you can only jump so far. I don't completely see a point in this mechanic. Like, sure, maybe they're trying to stop you from reaching faraway places early on in the game, or pushing you slightly to engage in the space combat. That way you can work on improving your various skills around that, since to jump to a further system, you have to jump to every system along the path. But when I'm all the way across the star map and experienced everything along the way, and it won't let me jump to Alpha Centauri system, but I can click into the Alpha Centauri system and fast travel to New Atlantis, then why is this even a mechanic? Just let me jump how far I want to. Why make me jump through a bunch of systems just to get to where I want to go? Really seems pointless to me. And could be a bit annoying for players doing fresh runs outside of New Game Plus. They almost should have made it to where once you visited a system, you have no restrictions in grav jumping to it. Just seems like that would have been a nice quality of life improvement that could have cut down some of the load screens when traveling great distances. Now at this point, it probably sounds like I don't like the game, but I do. I love Starfield, and despite some of the issues I mentioned so far, and trust me, there is more to come, there is a whole lot to love about the game. Like I said earlier, it is really impressive what they did with the systems around these planets, the various effects of gravity on the player, diverse environments, aliens, and more. It really is cool just landing on different planets and checking them out. Like the planet Tadacha. I was mesmerized by how different the various areas of the planet was, and was lost for a few hours just exploring it. I just wish the destinations on the planet were just a little bit more engaging or unique, because in terms of gunplay and movement, this is definitely by far the best Bethesda has done in one of their RPGs. It feels really good shooting the guns as you mow down endless pirates and aliens. Not to mention the powers you get from the temples are really cool with a ton of variety, from summoning a parallel universe version of yourself to just being able to pull resources towards you while exploring a planet. They nailed the core gameplay mechanics of Starfield. Heck, even the lockpicking mechanic is my favorite they have done. The dial-like puzzles you solve to get through a door or hack a computer was something I never got tired of. Also, the real meat of the gameplay that I would argue most people play Bethesda games for, the dialogue and interactions with characters throughout the world, are really well done. The speech checks are entertaining and add a nice twist when trying to talk or persuade people towards a certain outcome, thanks to this bar you have to fill up to succeed in these speech skill checks. Not to mention the random space encounters could be hilarious at times, though I can't help but feel your character's responses can feel very robotic at times. Definitely when it comes to romancing companions. I romanced Sarah Morgan, and a lot of my dialogue options felt very aggressive. Like, I don't think you should be saying those words so quickly. Luckily though, the companion missions for Sarah were really well written and led to some interesting moments that felt like she was actually growing as a person thanks to your help, and that was something I never really felt in past Bethesda games necessarily with companions. Though I will say the final mission where you get married feels so awkward. But that's the charm of Bethesda games, right? It's that combo of incredibly written stories with those silly moments that really brings the charm of their games to life. Which is something the main story did do well. Despite my issues with the general mission surrounding the artifacts, many key moments in the story from a writing perspective were incredible, like High Price to Pay, where after connecting with the diverse cast of characters in Constellation, which I do want to say they did a good job with them and their personalities, but one of the two top characters whose affinity with you is high will die depending on your choice during the mission. I really thought this was clever. For me, it was either Sam or Sarah. I chose to save Sarah unknowingly at the time that Sam would die, but when I returned to the lodge and saw Sam dead with his daughter grieving over his body, man, that really hit me. What a great but sad moment. Bethesda really threw a curveball with this one, and I applaud the team for that because they absolutely nailed it out of the park. Then this writing, of course, carries over to the factions as well. The entire UC vs Crimson Fleet questline is not only one of the best stories Bethesda has done, but the gameplay experience along with it is incredible. From getting kidnapped for a top secret mission, to exploring an old frozen prison, making a connection with countless space pirates, infiltrating a party and power plant, to an epic space battle. This entire quest line really encompasses what Starfield is all about. Tough choices, great gameplay moments, exploring the unknown and discovering a mystery, and you use all the tools you have at your disposal. The game makes you engage in almost every system to complete this faction questline. Easily the best time I had playing Starfield. Not to mention, it's the same with the smaller side quests. So many of them are so well written, like the Mantis side quest where you enter a base of what is essentially the lair of a superhero, and through some interesting backstory, you discover the Mantis wanted her son to replace her, but unfortunately, that never happened. So you basically take up the mantle and become the Mantis after solving some puzzles, which leads to you earning a new spaceship and outfit that the Mantis used, which then leads to some funny encounters where space pirates will panic at the sight of you because they realize you're the legendary Mantis and will fly away in fear. These little details really are what makes games like Starfield so great. Now, there is one core mechanic I felt could have been just a little bit better, and that's the perk system. The initial idea of it I really love, but the execution was just off a little bit to me. So as you level up, you get skill points. You can spend these skill points to unlock perks. The perks fall under 5 categories and have 4 tiers in those categories. To be able to spend points in the next tier, you have to spend so many points in the lower tier. Now this can be done by either spending the points on various perks in the first tier, or you can dump your points continually upgrading a perk you really love, since each individual perk has 4 levels. The only thing I would have changed about this system is how you initially unlocked a perk. Because after you unlock a perk with a skill point, before you can spend a point to upgrade that perk to the next level, you have to use it so many times. So for example, with the pain tolerance perk, after I unlock the first level, I have to take 500 physical damage before I can unlock the second level. I really wish they would have leaned a little bit more into this aspect. So for example, what I would have done was make it so all perks were a mystery and not locked behind tiers, but as you played the game, the first level of the perk was unlocked through the action relating to that perk instead of spending a skill point to unlock it. This would have gave the player the ability to unlock the first level of all perks through gameplay, then the skill points could come into play with the leveling up of perks. I think this dynamic would have felt more rewarding and natural, since it feels bad to be doing the action to increase a perk's level but not getting any progress towards it since you didn't spend a skill point to unlock it initially. Not the end of the world obviously, but just something that probably could have been done better. Then, moving on from there, Starfield from a gameplay and performance perspective was also a tale of two halves for me. At first I thought the opening of the game wasn't bad at all. Going through the mines and getting your introduction to the world wasn't that bad, and pretty comparable to past Bethesda games. But once the game basically dumped all the mechanics on top of me, it was a lot to take in, because past Bethesda games have one set world, so it's easy to get your bearings on the lay of the land and really focus on what you should do. Whereas Starfield has so much going on in all directions, it can be hard to really get into the flow of the game. It's one of those rare instances where the game really does get better and better the further into it you get. Every hour felt like an upgrade to the overall experience, and by the time I was 15 to 20 hours in, I was beyond hooked to the game thanks to how insanely good the side quests are in the Starfield universe. Unfortunately, performance was the opposite of this experience. The first 50 hours ran really smooth for me, but remember that entangled quest I mentioned earlier with the alternating between worlds? I crashed roughly 20 times in that mission, and going forward after I completed that mission, I experienced a ton of crashes all over the game. I have no idea why. It was the strangest thing, and it really sucked because I was at the pinnacle of the story and I couldn't really enjoy it because of the crashes, which is such a shame. And for those wondering, I was playing on an Xbox Series X for my playthrough. But now that I have covered the bulk of my experience I felt comfortable talking about so far with Starfield, I'm going to say this. What Bethesda went for here is nothing short of incredible. Even though I think they maybe got a little too ambitious, I respect and love what they have created. The core experience of a Bethesda game is here, and done just as good as any of their other games. The gunplay is the best I've seen from them, and the worlds they have created really are a spectacle to lay your eyes on. Not to mention, outside of the usual memes, I do think their character models are way better in this, and the list goes on. Starfield was a game I always dreamed of Bethesda making, and while not perfect, I have no issues for recommending it to anyone, and I look forward to seeing what Bethesda has learned from this experience going forward.